My fiancé called me his backup plan with a smile. So I cancelled our wedding that same night. My name is Natalie Mercer. I'm 31 years old, and until last Saturday night, I believed I was only 2 months away from marrying the man who had chosen me for the rest of his life. Ethan Cole and I had been together for 3 years and engaged for almost 1. When Ethan proposed, he cried before he even finished asking the question. I barely managed to whisper yes before he pulled me into a kiss so sudden that the couple at the next table actually applauded. I never doubted that moment. I thought it was the beginning of forever. By the time everything fell apart, the invitations had already been mailed. The venue and caterer were booked, and my wedding dress still hung untouched in the spare room closet. I'd spent nearly $28,000 preparing for a day I thought would begin the rest of my life, but losing the money never frightened me. What I thought I was investing in wasn't a wedding, it was a future. That Saturday started like countless others. Ethan made pasta, I opened a bottle of red wine, and after dinner, we settled onto the couch with a movie playing quietly while we finished the seating chart for the reception. He'd had 3 glasses over nearly 2 hours. Enough to relax, not nearly enough to blame what came next on alcohol. Without warning, he stopped studying the spreadsheet on my laptop and slowly rolled his wine glass between his hands. "Can I tell you something?" I smiled. "You usually do." I didn't smile back. "No, I mean something serious." The change in his voice was enough to make me close the laptop. I didn't know what was coming, only that whatever he was about to say was going to change the rest of the evening. "What is it?" He drew a slow breath. "Do you remember Olivia?" Of course I did. Olivia Hayes was the girlfriend he dated before we met. Whenever she came up, Ethan described the breakup as simple incompatibility. She wanted to travel, cared more about her career than marriage, and never saw herself settling down. He'd always spoken about her like she belonged to another lifetime. "The woman you dated before me?" He nodded. "I told you it was casual." "No," I corrected quietly. "You told me you weren't right for each other." His eyes dropped to the wine glass in his hands. That wasn't completely true. Helmut took another sip before finally saying the words that unraveled everything I'd believed about our future. "I was in love with her, Natalie. Really in love." Something tightened in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "How in love?" Instead of answering, Ethan stared into his wine for several seconds before quietly admitting, "I wanted to marry her." The movie kept playing in the background, its laughter sounding strangely out of place. "I honestly thought we'd spend our lives together," he said. "But every time I talked about buying a house or having kids, Livia acted like I was asking her to give up everything she wanted. So she left. Eventually, I held his gaze. And then you met me." For the first time that evening, he smiled. "You were completely different. You already knew what you wanted. You had your own place, a stable career, and commitment to never scared you. Everything Olivia ran from came naturally to you." He looked genuinely grateful, completely unaware that every sentence was dismantling the future we'd spent years building. "I'm actually glad things didn't work out with Olivia," he said. "Otherwise, my backup plan never would have worked out." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What did you just call me?" His smile disappeared. "I didn't mean it like that." "You called me your backup plan." "I meant life worked out differently." "No," I said quietly. "That's not what you meant." He reached for my knee. "Natalie, Olivia was who I thought I wanted. Then I met you and realized you were who I needed. Needed. Not the woman he couldn't live without. The woman who fit the life he'd already imagined." As I looked at his hand resting on my knee, 3 years of memories suddenly made sense. Every compliment about how dependable I was, every joke about finally being marriage material, every uncomfortable silence whenever Olivia's name surfaced fit together in a way I'd never allowed myself to see before. Without saying anything, I carried his wine glass into the kitchen, topped it off, and handed it back. "Thank you for telling me before the wedding." The relief on his face was immediate. "I knew you'd understand. You're so much more mature than most people." "I understand perfectly." Instead of sitting beside him again, I took the chair across from him. "Then answer one question. If Olivia knocked on this door tomorrow and told you she wanted the marriage, the family, and the future you'd always wanted, would you go back to her?" The color drained from his face. "That's not fair. It's yes or no. We're getting married." That wasn't my question. I looked away. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it was long enough. "It's complicated," he finally whispered. I nodded. "No, it really isn't." I walked into the bedroom, grabbed my laptop, opened the venue contract, and called the coordinator. "I'd like to cancel my wedding reservation for October 18th. Ethan stared at me in disbelief as I confirmed the cancellation, accepted the loss of the deposit, and requested written confirmation. "What are you doing?" I ended the call before answering. "I'm cancelling a wedding that should never happen." He stepped between me and the laptop. You're ending everything because I was honest? No, I said calmly. I'm ending it because you finally admitted why you chose me. I wasn't the woman you loved most. I was the woman who was still standing after Olivia walked away. That's not what I meant. But it's exactly what you said. I explained it badly. You explained it clearly enough. I moved around him and kept calling vendors. One by one, the caterer, photographer, DJ and florist confirmed the cancellations. With every phone call, Ethan became quieter, until by the last one he wasn't arguing anymore. I was crying. Please, don't do this. I closed the laptop and looked at him. You keep saying I'm throwing away 3 years. I'm not. I'm refusing to spend the next 30 wondering whether your heart ever really left someone else. I love you. I believe you care about me, I said. But loving someone because they fit the life you wanted isn't the same as choosing them simply because they're the person you can't imagine losing. He lowered his eyes. I would have married you. I would have been faithful. I believe that too, but I also believe some part of you would have spent our marriage wondering what your life would have been if Olivia had said yes. Hein didn't argue. Hein couldn't. His silence said more than any apology ever could. I picked up my phone and called Mason. I need you tomorrow, I said. I'm selling the condo. Ethan stared at me. Our condo? My condo. I bought it before we met. You're selling our home? There isn't an hour anymore. That was the moment everything changed. Until then, he'd believed I was angry. He thought we'd fight, he'd apologize, and eventually things would settle back into place. Instead, he realized I was leaving. The excuses came first, then the apologies. He blamed the wine, the pressure of planning the wedding, even his choice of words. He insisted Olivia had been out of his life for years and swore he'd choose me if she ever came back. The promise meant nothing. I'd already asked him that question when the truth was fresh, and the hesitation before his answer told me everything I needed to know. Near midnight, I asked him to stay with his parents for a while. He packed slowly, lingering at the bedroom door as though waiting for me to stop him. I never did. So that's it? He asked before leaving. You're ending everything over one sentence? I met his eyes. No, I'm ending it because one sentence explained the last 3 years. After the door closed, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. His unfinished glass of wine still sat beside the stack of wedding invitations we'd planned to hand out the following weekend. I stayed there for hours, thinking about the deposits I'd lost, the conversations waiting with both our families, and everything that had to be unraveled before morning. Somewhere beneath the grief, another feeling slowly surfaced. Relief. I'd learned the truth before the wedding instead of after it. Before going to bed, I slipped off my engagement ring, placed it beside his untouched wine glass, reopened my laptop, and finished cancelling everything that was left. I barely slept. The next morning, sunlight caught the ring on the coffee table. For a brief second, I forgot what had happened, until the cancellation emails, still open on my laptop, and the empty space in the closet brought everything rushing back. This time I didn't panic. I made coffee and started making decisions. Rachel Lawson, the attorney who'd handled my condo purchase years earlier, confirmed the breakup was legally straightforward. We weren't married, had never combined finances, and the condo belonged entirely to me. So legally you're fine, she said. Emotionally, that'll take longer. That's about what I expected. She promised to prepare paperwork confirming the engagement had ended and that Ethan had no claim to the property. Next, I called Mason. He arrived before lunch with 2 coffees, walked quietly through the condo, and took measurements without asking whether I was sure. You'll sell this place quickly. I looked around the living room. Every corner reminded me of a future that no longer existed. List it. You don't have to move just because the relationship ended. I know, I said. I just don't want to spend the next year trying to make this place stop reminding me of him. He nodded. I'll have it online tonight. By Sunday evening, the listing was live. The engagement was over and I'd lost more than $18,000 in deposits. It hurt. Just not as much as marrying Ethan would have. Monday morning, his mother called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. What is this nonsense about cancelling the wedding? Ethan came home devastated. He came home after telling me I was his backup plan. He'd been drinking. He had 3 glasses of wine, Diane. Alcohol didn't invent those feelings. It only made him say them out loud. She insisted I was throwing away a good man over one careless comment. I corrected her. It wasn't one careless comment. It was the first completely honest thing he'd said about our relationship. She fell quiet for a moment before trying one last argument. The wedding is only 2 months away, Diane argued. People have already made plans. That's not a reason to get married. You're embarrassing both families. Ethan should have thought about that before calling me his backup plan. I ended the call before she could say anything else. Richard called the next afternoon. Unlike his wife, he didn't raise his voice. "You've spent 3 years building a life together," he said. "Isn't that worth fighting for?" "I'd fight for someone who chose me without hesitation. I'm not going to spend my marriage wondering whether I'd always come second." He reminded me Ethan hadn't spoken to Olivia in years and pointed out how much money we'd already spent on the wedding. "I've cancelled almost everything." "You cancelled all of it?" "Every booking." When I told him I'd lost nearly $18,000, he fell silent. "You're willing to lose that much?" "I'm willing to lose $18,000 if it keeps me from losing the next 30 years. For the first time, he had no answer. Wednesday brought another surprise. Security called to say Ethan's sister Megan was waiting downstairs at my office. I almost refused to see her, but I knew she'd simply come back another day. "You need to talk to him," she said the moment I arrived. "I already have." "No, you ended his future overnight." He ended it himself. She told me Ethan wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, and regretted everything he'd said. When she finally stopped, I answered quietly, "Your brother chose me because I offered the future Olivia didn't. That wasn't fair to either of us. He deserved the woman he truly wanted, and I deserve someone who never has to convince himself I'm enough." "But he loves you." "Maybe," I said. "But love without certainty eventually becomes obligation." She looked at me for a long moment, hoping I'd soften. I didn't. She left without another word. The next evening, Tyler called. "I wasn't sure whether to tell you this." "Then I probably need to hear it." He sighed. "Olivia's back in town. She reached out to Ethan yesterday." My grip tightened around the phone. "And?" "He's telling her, and everyone else, that the wedding isn't cancelled, just postponed because he thinks you'll forgive him." I stared out the kitchen window. "So he never admitted it's over?" "No." That was all I needed to hear. As soon as we hung up, I texted Ethan. "We're not taking a break. The engagement is over. Stop telling people otherwise." His reply came almost instantly. "Please let me come home. We can fix this." "It isn't your home anymore." Another message appeared. "I was only trying to be honest." I answered once. Calling me your backup plan wasn't honesty. Refusing to answer whether you'd choose me over Olivia told me everything I needed to know. His final message read, "Please, I love you." I never replied. The following morning, loud pounding on my front door jolted me awake. "Natalie!" I opened the security camera on my phone. Ethan was standing outside in yesterday's clothes, exhausted and unshaven. "Please open the door." "You need to leave." "We have to talk." "No, we don't. I'm still your fiancé." "You're my ex-fiancé." His frustration exploded. "You're destroying everything over one stupid sentence." I shook my head. "No, I'm protecting myself because of what that sentence revealed. When I warned him I'd call the police if he refused to leave, he laughed. You wouldn't." Instead of arguing, I dialed 911. The confidence disappeared from his face the moment he heard the dispatcher answer. "Natalie, don't do this." I stayed on the line until he walked away. Only after his car disappeared did I realize how badly my hands were shaking. I hadn't called because I wanted him arrested. I called because the man I'd planned to marry had become someone I no longer felt safe letting into my home. The following week disappeared into paperwork. Mason scheduled showings almost immediately, and within days we already had several strong offers. Walking through the condo one last time, he looked around and smiled. Most people repaint after a breakup. They buy new furniture and try to make the place feel different. I know. But you're selling instead. I looked around the living room one last time. I don't want to spend the next year trying to erase him from every room. I'd rather start somewhere that doesn't remind me of him the moment I walk through the door. Mason nodded. "Then I'll make sure this place sells quickly." 3 days later, I accepted an offer. Closing was scheduled for the following month, and for the first time since the engagement ended, I felt as though my life had finally begun moving forward instead of standing still. That afternoon, Rachel called to say the paperwork was complete. The condo was legally mine, Ethan had no claim to it, and if he ignored my request to stop contacting me, she wanted me to document everything. "I've already started," I admitted, thinking about him pounding on my front door only days earlier. "Good," she said. "I hope you never need those records." "So do I." With the condo under contract, I started looking for somewhere new to live. Most of the apartments I toured felt either too cramped or too expensive, but the last one overlooked a quiet park, and the moment I stepped inside, I knew why it felt different. There were no memories waiting for me, no reminders of a wedding that would never happen. Just an empty apartment ready for a new beginning. "I'll take it," I told the leasing agent. She smiled. "I thought you might." I signed the lease the following Tuesday. Somehow Ethan found out before I'd packed a single box. "You're moving?" "Yes." "You signed a lease without talking to me?" "There isn't anything left to discuss. His voice softened. Natalie, you can't just disappear. I'm changing my address, Ethan. That's not the same thing. What about us? There is no us. Hal was quiet for a moment before finally admitting what he'd been thinking all along. I honestly believed you'd calm down once the wedding got closer. I let out a tired breath. So you thought I'd eventually accept being second choice because we'd already invested too much? That's not what I meant. You keep saying that, I replied. But every explanation leads back to the same place. I chose you. No, you settled for me. They're different. They stopped being different the moment Olivia became part of this conversation. I ended the call believing he'd finally understood. I was wrong. 2 mornings later, the doorbell rang. The security camera showed Ethan standing outside with both of his parents. I opened the door just enough to step into the hallway, making sure none of them could walk inside. Richard spoke first. Natalie, can we please talk like adults? We already are. Diane folded her arms. You've cancelled the wedding, sold the condo, and now you're moving. Don't you think this has gone far enough? I didn't create any of this, I replied. Ethan did the moment he called me his backup plan. Before either of his parents could continue, Ethan stepped forward. I'll do anything. Counselling, therapy, quitting my job, whatever it takes. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you're my first choice. Those words would have meant everything a week earlier. Now they only made me sad. You can prove something that wasn't true when it mattered. It is true now. Then answer one question. He nodded. If Olivia knocked on your door tonight and asked you to start over, would you send her away without even thinking? His expression changed. The hesitation lasted barely a second, but it was there. Diane immediately interrupted. That's a ridiculous question. No, I said quietly. It's the exact question that ended our engagement. Richard looked at his son. Ethan? I would. I shook my head. Oh, had to think about it. If the answer were really yes, you wouldn't have needed those few seconds. No one argued. The silence hanging in the hallway answered for him. Finally, Diane tried one last time. You're destroying his life over one conversation. I'm accepting the truth, he finally admitted. He chose you. He chose the future I could give him. She frowned. What's the difference? The difference is simple, I said. If Olivia had wanted the same future 3 years ago, Ethan and I would have never happened. No one argued. Richard let out a slow sigh and tried one last approach. Think about everything you've built together. 4 years, both families, your friends. Are you really willing to walk away from all of it? I already have, I said, because staying would cost even more. They looked at me without understanding, so I continued. Just because you've invested years in something doesn't mean you keep investing after you realize the foundation was never solid. Richard lowered his eyes. So this is really over. I'm trying to save myself from spending the next 40 years wondering whether I was ever enough. Ethan instinctively reached for my hand. I stepped back before he could touch me. The disappointment on his face was immediate. You won't even let me hold your hand. I shook my head. Every time I look at you, I hear the words backup plan. I don't think I'll ever forget them. His shoulders slumped. I hate myself for saying that. I believe you, I replied quietly. But regretting those words doesn't erase what they revealed. No one spoke after that. Richard finally rested a hand on his son's shoulder. We should go. Ethan looked at me one last time. I don't want this to end. It already did, I said, the moment you couldn't answer my question. He stood there for another second before turning toward the elevator. His parents followed, and when the doors finally closed, the hallway became quiet again. Back inside my apartment, I sat by the living room window until sunset. I was still heartbroken, still exhausted, but underneath all of it was a feeling I hadn't expected. Peace, not because Ethan was suffering, because I no longer questioned whether I had ever been enough. 2 weeks after the condo sale closed, Lauren finally decided I'd spent enough time hiding from the world. You've buried yourself in paperwork long enough, she said. Come to dinner. I'm not ready to date. I didn't ask you on a date. I asked you to eat. After nearly an hour of arguing, I gave in. There were only 8 people at the dinner, and I barely spoke until the man across from me noticed the novel beside my chair. I've been trying to finish that author for months, he said with a smile. I'm Noah Bennett. Conversation with him felt effortless. We started with books, drifted into movies, travel, and childhood stories. And before either of us noticed, everyone else had moved on. During the entire evening, he never asked about the missing engagement ring or why I seemed quieter than everyone else. When we left, he smiled. I really enjoyed talking with you. So did I. Outside, Lauren nudged my arm. I told you. Told me what? Sometimes life has to clear space before it gives you something better. As I walked to my car, I glanced back. Noah had just opened his door, but he looked over, smiled, and gave me a small wave. I smiled back without thinking. On the drive home, I realized something had changed. For the first time since the breakup, I wasn't replaying every conversation with Ethan. Instead, I kept thinking about how easy it had been to talk to Noah. There was no pressure to impress him, no feeling that I was being measured against someone from his past. I'd forgotten how exhausting that had become. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. I hope this isn't too forward, but would you like to grab coffee sometime? I smiled before answering. I'd like that. Coffee turned into long Saturday mornings, then dinners, museum visits, and slow walks through the botanical gardens. Nothing about us felt rushed. We weren't trying to impress each other or force the relationship into a label. We simply enjoyed being together, and somewhere along the way I realized how much I'd missed silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. On our 4th date, Noah finally asked about my engagement. You don't have to answer if it's still painful. It's okay. So I told him the truth. My fiancé admitted I was never really his first choice. He said I was the woman he settled for after the one he truly loved walked away. Noah stared at me for a moment. He actually said that? He even called me his backup plan. He shook his head slowly. Then he made the biggest mistake of his life. There was no pity in his voice, only quiet certainty. And somehow that meant more than any long speech could have. By the end of the month, neither of us pretended these were just friendly outings anymore. We never had a dramatic conversation about becoming a couple. It simply happened. A week later, I posted my first photo in months, just Noah and me having dinner outside a small restaurant. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. So it's true, he said. You're seeing someone. We've been broken up for 6 weeks. That's not enough time. For you, maybe. There isn't an us anymore. His voice tightened. You moved on that fast? I almost laughed at the irony. You spent years comparing me to Olivia. I apologized. I know. And now you're with another man. I'm with someone who never made me compete with another woman. The line went quiet. Finally, he asked, almost reluctantly, who is he? Someone kind. Then I ended the call. The next morning, Megan sent me a message accusing me of replacing Ethan while he was still devastated. I answered once. Your brother told me I was his backup plan. I'm allowed to move on. Sai replied immediately. Anu made one mistake. I looked at the screen before typing back. No, he finally told the truth. She never contacted me again. That afternoon, my mother called, laughing before she'd even finished saying hello. Ethan's mother just phoned me. Let me guess. She says I replaced him. Exactly. And what did you tell her? I asked whether Ethan still thought of you as his backup plan. I couldn't help smiling. When she couldn't answer, my mother continued. I told her my daughter deserves someone who chooses her without hesitation. Thanks, Mom. You never have to thank me for that. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. A few days later, while I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment, building security called. Ms. Mercer, there's a man in the lobby asking to see you. He says he's your fiancé. My stomach tightened. That's Ethan. He's not my fiancé anymore. We've asked him to leave. If he refuses again, call the police. About 10 minutes later, the guard called back. He finally left. After hanging up, I realized something. Ethan hadn't come because he wanted closure. He came because he couldn't accept that I'd already found mine. The following evening, Noah slid his phone across the dinner table. I think you should see this. A message from Ethan filled the screen. Natalie isn't over me. She's using you to make me jealous. We're getting back together, so don't get attached. Heat rushed to my face. I'm so sorry. You didn't send it, Noah said with a shrug. I already replied. He opened his response. Natalie told me exactly why the engagement ended. If you really care about her, stop making her life harder and let her move on. You actually sent that? I wasn't trying to win an argument, he said. If someone loves you, they respect your decision. That was it. No jealousy. No competition. Just quiet confidence. On the walk to our cars, he asked. When you first told me about Ethan, did you think I'd compare myself to him? I didn't know. He smiled. I wasn't interested in another man. I was interested in getting to know you. The simplicity of that answer stayed with me all the way home. Thursday morning, Ethan reached me through my office before reception realized who was calling. I only need 5 minutes. You've already had them. I saw the pictures. I assumed you would. He's not better than me. I closed my office door. This has never been about who's better. Noah never made me feel like I had to compete with another woman before I even mattered. The line fell quiet. So, it's really over? It ended the night you smiled and called me your backup plan. When I hung up, I expected the familiar ache. It never came. For the first time, goodbye felt like acceptance instead of loss. A few nights later, Noah and I were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant by the river, laughing over a novel we'd spent half the evening arguing about, when a familiar voice interrupted us. I knew I'd find you here. Ethan stood beside the table looking exhausted. Noah glanced at me. Do you want me to leave? I shook my head. No, I stood. You need to stop doing this. You stopped answering my calls. Because I asked you to stop calling. I didn't have a choice. You always have one. Nearby conversations faded as people began watching. Just give me 5 minutes. No. His eyes shifted toward Noah. So this is him. Noah stayed seated, leaving the decision entirely to me. You're really throwing away 4 years for someone you've known a few weeks? Ethan asked. I'm not throwing anything away, I replied. I'm finally building something that doesn't begin with comparison. He'll disappoint you too. Maybe, but he never asked me to compete with another woman before giving me a chance. By then, the restaurant had gone almost silent. I made one mistake, Ethan pleaded. You keep calling it a mistake because admitting what it meant is harder. I apologized. I know. I even started therapy. That caught me off guard. When? The week after you left. He searched my face. I'm trying. I believe you, I said, but you're only trying because I walked away. If I'd stayed, none of this would have happened. He couldn't answer. The manager reached our table. Is everything all right? No, I said. This is my former fiancé. I've repeatedly asked him to stop contacting me. The manager turned to Ethan. Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave. We're having a private conversation. You interrupted ours. Realizing everyone was watching, Ethan turned toward Noah. So you're just going to stand there? Only then did Noah rise. This isn't my conversation, he said calmly. But when someone tells you they don't want contact anymore, respecting that isn't losing. It's maturity. Security escorted Ethan outside without another word. As I apologized, Noah simply smiled. You've apologized for him enough. We walked toward the parking lot in silence until I admitted I was tired of feeling like my past kept following me. He shook his head. It isn't your past following you. It's someone refusing to accept your decision. His words were still echoing in my head when we reached my car. Scratched across the driver's door was a single word. Cheater. Neither of us spoke. Noah pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. Officer Daniels arrived 20 minutes later. As he photographed the damage, I showed him everything. The calls, the apartment visits, the office, the restaurant, and Ethan's messages to Noah. By the time he finished reviewing everything, his expression had changed. This isn't just vandalism anymore, he said. It's a pattern. What do you mean? Repeated unwanted contact showing up at your home and workplace, contacting your new partner, and now property damage. These incidents are escalating. I looked at the deep scratch across my door. I never wanted this. I know, he said. But if you were my sister, I'd tell you to apply for a protective order. The repairs would cost a little over $2,000, most of it covered by insurance. The money wasn't what bothered me. It was realizing Ethan had stopped acting like someone with a broken heart. People who are heartbroken grieve. They don't ignore boundaries, drag strangers into someone else's life, or vandalize property because they can't accept being left behind. The next morning, Rachel already had every piece of evidence organized. Security logs, phone records, photographs, police reports, witness statements, and screenshots. You have a strong case. I never wanted one. I know. She slid one document toward me. Petition for protective order. I stared at it. This isn't revenge, Rachel said quietly. It's protection. That was all I needed. I picked up the pen and signed. 3 days later, Ethan was served. That evening, he left a voicemail. A restraining order. Natalie, please. I'm trying to fight for us. I deleted it without listening again. He still believed we were fighting each other. He never understood I was simply protecting the life I'd already chosen. At the hearing the following week, Ethan arrived with his parents and an attorney. His lawyer described everything as an emotional breakup. Rachel stood and calmly corrected him. This isn't about heartbreak, she said. It's about a documented pattern of harassment. She handed over a binder containing weeks of evidence. Security reports, phone records, photographs, repair estimates, witness statements, and screenshots of Ethan's repeated attempts to contact both me and Noah after being told to stop. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the evidence before looking directly at Ethan. Mr. Cole, did Ms. Mercer repeatedly ask you to stop contacting her? She was emotional. That wasn't my question. After a long silence, he finally answered. Yes, And despite those requests, you continued showing up at her home, workplace, and elsewhere. Yes. She lifted the photograph of my vandalized car. And this? Ethan lowered his head. I was angry. The judge closed the file. Anger is not a legal defense for harassment or vandalism. The petition for a protective order is granted. Ethan shut his eyes while his mother immediately tried to object. This is ridiculous. Ma'am, the judge interrupted. Another outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. That ended the discussion. The order was simple and unmistakable. 1 year of no contact. No calls, messages, third-party communication, unexpected visits, or attempts to approach me in any way. As Rachel gathered our paperwork, she leaned over and quietly said, "You did the right thing." For the first time since Ethan smiled and called me his backup plan, I believed the hardest part was finally behind me. Walking out of the courthouse, I expected relief. Instead, I felt something quieter. Peace. Rachel slipped a copy of the court order into my folder before we said goodbye. Keep this with you for a while. If he violates it, call the police immediately. I hope I never have to. So do I. After she left, I stayed on the courthouse steps for another minute, breathing in the cool autumn air. For months, my life had revolved around one question: whether Ethan would ever accept that we were over. Now someone else had answered it for him. The weeks that followed were almost unnervingly quiet. No unexpected phone calls, no flowers left outside my apartment, no mutual friends insisting Ethan just wanted to explain. I hadn't realized how exhausting constant anxiety had become until it finally disappeared. The condo sale closed exactly as planned, leaving me with enough equity for the down payment on a smaller house closer to work. It wasn't as spacious, but every room belonged entirely to me. There were no old arguments hiding in the walls, no memories waiting around the next corner, just empty spaces ready for a different life. Noah spent an entire Saturday helping me unpack. At one point, he picked up a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile," and grinned. Plates or emotional baggage? Mostly plates. Good, he laughed. I left my emotional baggage at my last apartment. I laughed harder than I had in months, and for the first time since the breakup, it felt completely natural. The months that followed passed quietly. I settled into my new home, work found its rhythm again, and without realizing it, life slowly stopped revolving around what I'd lost. By the third month after the breakup, I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living again. Noah and I never rushed anything. We simply enjoyed ordinary weekends together, trying new restaurants, wandering museums, hiking nearby trails, or cooking dinner at home. One evening, while we were assembling a bookshelf in my living room, he glanced over and said, almost casually, "You know, I've never once wondered who came before me." I stopped what I was doing. "Really?" He shrugged. "I'm dating you, not your past." The simplicity of that answer stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Ethan had spent years comparing me to someone who was gone. Noah never compared me to anyone, and that was when I finally understood what healthy love looked like. It never asks you to compete with ghosts. Not everyone agreed with my decision, though. A few mutual friends quietly drifted away, and one eventually admitted why. I still think ending a 4-year relationship over one comment was extreme. I smiled. It wasn't one comment, it was a confession. Once I explained exactly what Ethan had admitted, and how he couldn't answer whether he'd choose me if Olivia came back, most people understood. Those who didn't weren't really judging my relationship. They were deciding whether they would have accepted the same treatment themselves. As time passed, I occasionally heard updates about Ethan through mutual friends, never because I asked, but because news has a way of finding people. Then one afternoon, Lauren called. You'll never guess. What happened? Ethan contacted Olivia. I figured he might. She turned him down. I stayed quiet as Lauren explained that Olivia had been in a serious relationship for nearly a year and had no interest in reopening the past. She wished Ethan well, but made it clear there would never be another chance. After we hung up, I sat by the window for a long time, not because I felt vindicated, but because I finally understood something that had haunted me for months. Ethan had never really been choosing between Olivia and me. He'd been chasing a version of the future he'd imagined with her, rewriting it in his mind until it became impossible for any real person to compete with. I never lost to Olivia. I lost to a fantasy. Several weeks later, Rachel called with one final update. Ethan's attorney reached out. I frowned. Why? He wanted to pass along an apology and ask whether you'd be willing to give Ethan some closure. What did you tell him? Rachel smiled. I reminded him the protective order applies to indirect contact as well. Then I suggested his client look for closure in therapy instead of through you. I couldn't help laughing. Thank you. After we hung up, I realized something strange. A few months earlier, hearing Ethan wanted closure would have reopened every wound I'd worked so hard to heal. Now, it barely affected me. Healing doesn't always happen all at once. One day I realized I had gone an entire afternoon without thinking about Ethan at all. That was when I knew I had finally moved on. One Saturday afternoon, Noah and I went to a baseball game. During the 7th inning, he noticed me staring at the date on the scoreboard. "You okay?" I smiled. It would have been our wedding weekend. I didn't rush to reassure me or pretend the date meant nothing. "Do you want to leave?" I looked around the stadium at families laughing, children running through the aisles, and thousands of strangers enjoying an ordinary afternoon before turning back to him. "No, I'm exactly where I want to be." He squeezed my hand, and we watched the rest of the game without another word. That evening, while we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Noah asked quietly, "If you could go back, would you still have proposed to Ethan?" I thought about it longer than he probably expected. I wish I'd recognized the signs sooner. What signs? The way he talked about me. I explained that Ethan had always praised me for being dependable, practical, and stable, but rarely because he simply couldn't imagine life without me. I confused appreciation with love. Noah nodded. "There's a difference." "There is. Would you change anything?" I smiled. "No, because if I hadn't gone through all of it, I might never have learned what it feels like to be chosen without hesitation." A few minutes later, Noah laughed. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "When we first met, I thought you had the kindest laugh I'd heard in years." "You mean after we argued about historical fiction?" "Exactly. I hoped I'd get to hear that laugh again." "You did, and I'd like to keep hearing it for a very long time." There were no grand promises or dramatic declarations, just quiet sincerity. Somehow, that meant more. As autumn turned into winter, I unpacked the final moving box and found one of our old wedding invitations. Months earlier, seeing it would have shattered me. Now it simply reminded me how close I'd come to marrying someone whose heart had never completely let go of the past. I carried the invitation outside, dropped it into the fire pit, and watched it burn until nothing remained but drifting ash. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only closure. Looking back, I don't think Ethan lied that night. For the first time in our relationship, he told me exactly how he felt. The difference was that I finally believed him. People have asked whether I overreacted, whether 4 years together deserved another chance, counseling, or more forgiveness. Maybe. But I've never believed love should depend on convincing someone you're enough, or that marriage should begin with hoping your partner eventually stops wondering about someone else. I wanted something much simpler. To wake up every morning beside someone who chose me, not because I was practical, dependable, or the safer option after someone else walked away, but simply because I was me. That's what Noah gave me from the very beginning. Not promises, not perfect words, just the quiet certainty that I never had to compete for a place in his heart. Looking back now, I don't think the night Ethan called me his backup plan was the worst night of my life. It was the night I finally saw the truth. For years, I'd been trying to become enough for someone who was still holding on to a version of the past that no longer existed. The moment I stopped chasing that impossible standard, I stopped losing myself. People still ask whether I regret walking away from 4 years together. I don't. I regret only one thing, that I didn't believe sooner that real love never asks you to prove you're worth choosing. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if I'd ignored that conversation and gone through with the wedding. Then I remember the look on Ethan's face when he couldn't answer the simplest question I'd ever asked him. That silence would have followed us into every anniversary, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday for the rest of our lives. I'm grateful it ended before I promised forever to someone who was still looking backward. Today, when I wake up beside Noah, I never wonder whether I'm enough. And after everything that happened, I don't think love has ever given me a greater gift than that.